The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat above the gravel lot of Rusty Chains Bar, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt. It was just past midnight, in the dusty outskirts of a forgotten Nevada town, where the desert wind whispered secrets through chain-link fences, and the air hung heavy with the scent of stale beer and engine oil. Every night for weeks, a small figure had claimed the same spot, a weathered wooden bench outside the bar's back door, her tiny knees drawn up to her chest, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit as if it were her only anchor. She was no more than 7, her dark hair tangled and unkempt, her clothes threadbare and dusted with the day's grime. No one inside the rowdy den of leather-clad riders and clinking bottles paid her much mind. The world of roaring Harleys and late-night brawls had its own brutal rhythm, indifferent to the fragile. But on this night, as the bar's door swung open with a groan, spilling golden light and the low rumble of laughter into the cool air, Ethan Ghost Harlan stepped out for a smoke. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his face etched with the lines of too many sun-scorched miles and unspoken regrets. A faded tattoo of a soaring eagle peeked from under the sleeve of his worn black vest, the emblem of the Iron Promise MC, a brotherhood forged in the fires of old wars and unbreakable oaths. Ethan's bike, a sleek black Road King with chrome that gleamed like polished steel under the moon, sat sentinel among the cluster of two-wheelers. He paused, lighting his cigarette with a Zippo that clicked like a memory resurfacing, his grey eyes narrowing at the girl. She'd been there again, silent as a shadow, her wide eyes reflecting the bar's erratic glow. Something in her stillness tugged at him, a quiet pull amid the chaos he knew too well. Ethan exhaled a slow plume of smoke, the cherry glowing red against the night. He wasn't one for strays. Life on the road had taught him to keep his distance, to honor the code of the club above all else. But as he watched her shiver slightly in the chill, he felt an old ache stir, the ghost of a promise he'd buried deep after the war. His own daughter, lost to a senseless accident years ago, had sat just like that once, waiting for him to come home from a run. He crushed the cigarette under his boot, gravel crunching like bones, and approached with deliberate steps. The girl's head snapped up, her rabbit clutched tighter, eyes wide with a mix of fear and weary resignation. "Hey, kid," Ethan said, his voice gravelly but soft, like thunder held at bay. "You can't keep sitting out here like this. What's your name? And why the hell are you out here every night?" She hesitated, her small fingers twisting the rabbit's ear, the fabric worn thin from endless comfort. "Lily," she whispered finally, her voice barely cutting through the distant hum of a highway truck. "My mom's inside, but she forgets about me sometimes." Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger igniting in his chest, not at the girl, but at the neglect that painted her world in shades of abandonment. He glanced back at the bar, where the muffled strains of a jukebox blues tune bled out, and the silhouettes of patrons blurred through the grimy windows. Lily's mother, he knew from overheard whispers among the riders, was a regular, a woman named Carla chasing highs and hollow nights in the arms of fleeting strangers. The bar was no place for a child, yet here Lily was, night after night, a tiny sentinel in a storm of adult recklessness. Kneeling to her level, Ethan pulled a spare bandana from his pocket, the fabric soft and smelling faintly of leather polish. He draped it over her shoulders like a makeshift cape. "Forgets, huh? That ain't right. You got family? Anyone who looks out for you?" Lily shook her head, her lower lip trembling but her gaze steady, as if she'd learned long ago not to cry in front of strangers. "Just Mom, and the bar. She says it'll be okay, but it never is." The words hung between them, simple yet heavy, stirring the embers of Ethan's past. He thought of his own vows, to protect the innocent, to stand as the shield for those who couldn't. The Iron Promise wasn't just bikes and brotherhood. It was a covenant born from the ashes of betrayal, where men like him rode for redemption, honoring debts that time couldn't erase. Inside the bar, the noise swelled, a glass shattering, a burst of laughter, but Ethan tuned it out, his focus sharpening on Lily's pale face. "Listen to me, kid. No one gets left behind on my watch. You stick with me tonight, all right? We'll find your mum. Make sure she's straight." Lily's eyes searched his, a spark of tentative trust flickering there. It was a small promise, uttered in the quiet before dawn, but Ethan felt its weight settle like an old oath renewed. He stood, offering his calloused hand, and she took it after a beat, her small palm warm against his. As they stepped toward the door, the desert wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and possibility. Little did Ethan know, this simple act would unravel threads of corruption woven deep into the town's underbelly, a web of neglect, hidden abuses, and powers that preyed on the vulnerable. But for now, in the glow of the neon, he was just a rider, keeping his word. The bar's interior hit like a wave, dim lights swinging from exposed beams, the air thick with cigarette haze and the tang of spilled whiskey. Pool cues cracked against balls, and a grizzled bartender nodded at Ethan as he guided Lily through the crowd. Riders from the club, men with scars like road maps and eyes that had seen too much, glanced their way, curiosity rippling through the group. Jax, Ethan's second in command, a burly vet with a salt and pepper beard, leaned against the counter, nursing a beer. "What's this, Ghost? Picking up strays now?" he rumbled, but there was no mockery, only the quiet respect of brothers who understood the pull of the past. Ethan scanned the room, spotting Carla at a corner table, her laughter brittle as she leaned into a tattooed stranger. Lily tugged his hand, pointing silently. "That's her." Ethan nodded, steeling himself. He approached, his presence parting the crowd like a shadow over water. "Carla," he said evenly, voice cutting through the din. She looked up, bleary-eyed, recognition dawning slowly. "Who's the kid with you? Wait, that's my Lily. What are you—" "She's been sittin' outside every night, waitin' while you chase ghosts in here," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm but not cruel. "This ends now. You need help. The club's got resources, but she don't pay for your mistakes." Carla's face crumpled, a mix of shame and defiance flashing across it. The stranger at her side shifted uncomfortably, but one look from Ethan silenced any protest. Lily clung to his leg, peeking out, and in that moment, Ethan saw the fracture lines in Carla's life. Addiction's grip, perhaps tied to something darker. Whispers of local dealers preying on the desperate. As the night wore on, Ethan arranged for Lily to crash at the club's safe house, a modest cabin on the outskirts where the Iron Promise kept watch over their own. He rode back with Jax, the engine's roar echoing through the starlit desert, wind whipping at their faces. "You sure about this, brother?" Jax shouted over the throttle. Ethan gripped the handlebars tighter, the vibration humming through his bones. "Yeah, made a promise to that girl tonight, and I don't break those." Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sands in hues of gold as the first threads of a larger fight began to weave. A battle for justice that would test the club's loyalties and unearth secrets Ethan thought long buried. For Lily, and for the boy he'd once failed to save, the ride had just begun. The first light of dawn sliced through the cabin windows like a knife through silk, painting the worn wooden floors in stripes of amber and shadow. The safe house sat on the edge of the Nevada Badlands, a squat structure of weathered pine and corrugated tin that the Iron Promise MC had claimed years ago as a refuge from the world's sharper edges. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee brewing on a hot plate, and the faint, lingering trace of motor oil from the garage out back. Ethan Harlan, ghost to his brothers, pushed open the door with a creak, his boots thudding softly against the threshold. He'd barely slept, the night's events replaying in his mind like a scratched reel, Lily's small hand in his, Carla's hollow eyes, the weight of a promise he'd made without thinking twice. Lily was curled up on the threadbare couch, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, her breathing steady in the quiet. Jax had stayed the night, dozing in a chair by the window, his massive frame slumped like a guardian statue. He stirred as Ethan entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. She ate something, cereal and milk from the stash. Kid's tougher than she looks. Jax's voice was a low rumble, laced with the gravel of too many desert miles. Ethan nodded, pouring himself a mug of black coffee, the steam rising like ghosts from his past. He glanced at Lily, her face peaceful now, free from the bar's harsh glow. For a moment he saw his own daughter there, the one whose laughter had been silenced by a rain-slicked road and a moment's distraction. The ache twisted in his gut, but he shoved it down. Promises weren't kept for the dead, they were for the living, like this girl who'd slipped through the cracks. By mid-morning, the cabin buzzed with the low hum of club activity. A few brothers arrived on their bikes, engines growling to life in the yard, kicking up dust that swirled like golden fog. They weren't here for a run, just a check-in, the kind of quiet solidarity that bound the iron promise tighter than blood. Samuel Bear Ruiz, a stocky veteran with a beard like tangled wire and eyes that missed nothing, clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Heard you pulled a good Samaritan last night. That true, Ghost?" Samuel's tone carried the weight of shared history. They'd ridden together through sandstorms in forgotten wars, forging oaths that outlasted uniforms. Ethan set his mug down, the ceramic clinking against the scarred table. "More than that. Girl's mom is slipping bad. Barfly life catching up. But there's something off. Whispers about folks pushing bad stuff on the desperate, turning the town into a trap." The men gathered around the kitchen table, maps of the local sprawl unrolled like battle plans. No one spoke of glory. This was about the code, the unspoken vow to shield the weak from the wolves. Lily stirred then, rubbing her eyes and clutching her rabbit as she padded over, barefoot on the cool floor. The room fell silent, the bikers' tough exteriors softening like leather in the sun. "Morning, kid," Ethan said, sliding a bowl of fruit her way. She managed a small smile, nibbling an apple, her gaze darting between the strangers, who suddenly felt less like threats and more like a makeshift family. Jax ruffled her hair gently. "You safe here. We look out for our own now." But safety was a fragile thing in these parts. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sagebrush, a knock echoed at the door, sharp, insistent. Ethan tensed, his hand instinctively brushing the knife at his belt. He signaled the others to stay back and cracked the door, peering out. Carla stood there, disheveled in the harsh light, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed. She clutched a frayed purse like a lifeline, the scent of stale smoke clinging to her clothes. I came for Lily. You can't just take her like that." Her voice cracked, a mix of defiance and desperation, but Ethan saw the tremor in her hands, the way she avoided his gaze. He stepped aside, letting her in, the door groaning shut behind her. Lily froze, apple halfway to her mouth, her small face paling. The room thickened with tension, the bikers watching like hawks on a wire. "Ain't taken her permanent," Ethan said evenly, his voice a steady anchor. "But you gotta get straight, Carla. Sitting outside every night. That's no life for her. What's really going on? You into something deeper than the bottle?" Carla's shoulders slumped, and she sank into a chair, Lily edging closer to Ethan instinctively. The words spilled out then, halting at first, then in a rush. Debts to shadowy figures who'd hooked her on pills to pay for a roof that leaked promises. "They own half the town, the bar, the motel. Said if I didn't, they'd take more than money." Her eyes flicked to Lily, horror dawning. Signs of pressure. of coercion that left invisible scars, hung in her confession like smoke. Samuel leaned forward, his massive hands flat on the table. Names. We need names. It wasn't a demand, it was the club's way. Truth as the first strike against darkness. Carla hesitated, then whispered fragments. A local enforcer called Vance, tied to bigger players who masqueraded as upstanding citizens, preying on the broken for profit. The air grew heavy, the moral lines sharpening. This wasn't just one woman's fall, it was a rot festering in the town's veins, corruption dressed in suits and smiles, ignoring the cries of the overlooked. Ethan knelt by Lily, his voice low. "You hear that? We're going to fix this. Made a promise last night, and it just got bigger." She nodded, trust blooming in her eyes like a desert flower after rain. As Carla gathered her daughter for a tentative hug, the bikers exchanged glances, oaths renewed in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the distant roar of approaching engines. Word had spread through the club grapevine. More brothers were coming, drawn by the call of justice. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the sun warming his face, the horizon stretching endless. He'd buried his regrets once, but they were rising now, demanding he ride for redemption. For Lily, for Carla, for the boy he'd failed long ago. This fight would test every scar, every vow. The engine's thunder grew closer, a symphony of loyalty, as the iron promise prepared to roll against the shadows. The sun hung high over the Nevada Badlands like a watchful eye, its rays baking the earth into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon. Dust devils danced lazily across the scrubland, kicking up fine grit that stung the eyes and coated the tongue with the taste of forgotten trails. At the safe house porch, Ethan Harlan stood with arms crossed, his leather vest creaking softly as he shifted his weight. The approaching roar of engines swelled from the distance, a deep, throaty symphony that vibrated through the ground like an ancient drumbeat. It wasn't just a few bikes. It was the full weight of the Iron Promise MC mobilizing, brothers answering a silent call that echoed louder than words. Ethan's grey eyes narrowed against the glare, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Loyalty like this didn't come cheap. It was forged in the fires of shared scars and unbreakable oaths. The convoy crested the rise first, a line of gleaming chrome and black steel cutting through the heat waves like predators on the prowl. Leading them was Marcus Rogue Kane, a lean rider in his 30s with a jagged scar tracing his jawline from a long-ago skirmish overseas. His bike, a customized softail with flames licked along the tank, growled to a halt at the yard's edge, followed by a dozen more. Tires crunching gravel, exhaust popping like distant gunfire. The men dismounted in unison, a ritual of respect, their boots kicking up puffs of dust that settled on faded patches sewn to their vests, the soaring eagle, symbol of promises that outlasted the storm. Marcus strode forward, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm tattooed in faded ink. "Ghost," he greeted, clasping Ethan's hand in a grip that spoke of battles won and lost. "Jax filled us in over the wire. Girl in trouble? Town's gone rotten. We're here." Inside, the cabin's air had thickened with the scent of cooling coffee and the low murmur of voices. Carla sat at the table, Lily perched on her lap, the child's small fingers tracing patterns on her mother's sleeve, a tentative bridge over the chasm of neglect. Samuel Bear Ruiz loomed nearby, his presence a steady wall, while Jax paced by the window, his salt-and-pepper beard twitching with restrained energy. The door swung open, admitting the newcomers in a rush of hot air and the faint tang of gasoline. Introductions were brief, nods exchanged like secrets in the wind. Lily's eyes widened at the influx, but she didn't shrink back. Ethan's earlier words had planted a seed of safety, and these men, with their rough edges and quiet honor, watered it, Ethan gathered them in the main room, the scarred wooden table now a war council under the slanting light. Maps were spread wider, marked with scribbles from Carla's fragmented confessions, circles around the rusty chains bar, arrows pointing to a rundown motel on the town's frayed edge, and question marks over a nondescript warehouse that locals avoided after dark. "It's not just pills," Carla said, her voice steadier now, bolstered by the room's unyielding support. "Vance and his crew, they run it like a machine. Hook you with help for hard times, then squeeze till you're nothing. Said they'd come for Lily if I talked. But after last night, I can't let that happen." Her hand tightened around her daughter, a mother's fierce whisper cutting through the cynicism that had clouded her days. Marcus leaned in, his scar pulling taut as he frowned. "Vance Harlan. No relation, I hope." He glanced at Ethan, who shook his head sharply. The name hung like a bad omen. Vance was a ghost from the town's underbelly, a former cop turned enforcer, his badge traded for bribes that kept the corruption flowing. Whispers among the riders painted him as the linchpin, protecting suppliers who preyed on the desperate, turning dreams into debts with a smile and a handshake. "He's got ties to the sheriff's office," Marcus continued, tapping the map. "Fake patrols, real threats. We've crossed paths before, small stuff, warnings to stay out. But this, involving a kid, that's crossing the line we don't forgive." The room pulsed with a shared resolve, the air humming with the unspoken code of the club. Ethan felt it deep in his bones, a renewal of the vow he'd made in the neon glow outside the bar. His past flickered at the edges, nights in distant sands where he'd sworn to shield his squad, only to watch promises shatter under fire. That boy from the war, left behind in the chaos, his face a blur of regret that Ethan carried like an extra saddlebag. Lily's situation stirred it all up, demanding he act before history repeated its cruel loop. "We don't go in guns blazing," he said, his voice a low anchor amid the rising tension. "This is about truth, not blood. Scout the motel tonight, talk to folks who've felt the squeeze. Show 'em the iron promise stands for more than rides. We stand for the forgotten." As the sun dipped toward the jagged mountains, casting long shadows that clawed at the cabin walls, the plan took shape. Jax and Samuel would ride point, blending into the evening crowd at the bar to gather ears on the ground, quiet questions over beers, eyes on the shadows. Marcus coordinated with a network of old allies, a nurse from the local clinic who'd seen too many signs of pressure on weary faces, a mechanic who fixed bikes and overheard deals in his shop. Carla, bolstered by a club doctor's discreet visit, agreed to stay put with Lily, the safe house now fortified with extra eyes watching the perimeter. The girl, sensing the shift, slipped her hand into Ethan's as he prepared to mount up. "You'll come back?" she asked, her voice small but threaded with hope. "Like the dawn, kid," Ethan replied, ruffling her hair with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands. "Promises like mine don't fade." He swung onto his Road King, the engine snarling to life beneath him, a beast awakened. The convoy reformed outside, bikes idling in a low thunder that shook the sagebrush. One by one they peeled out, tires biting the dirt road that snaked toward town. The wind rushed past, carrying the scent of creosote and freedom, but Ethan's mind raced ahead, to Vance's web, the moral rot that hid behind closed doors and the redemption that waited on the other side. As the safe house receded in the rear view, a lone hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the sky like a call to arms. The ride wasn't just for justice, it was for healing fractures old and new, binding a family chosen in the dust and roar of the open road. Dusk settled over the outskirts like a velvet shroud, the motel's neon sign buzzing faintly against the encroaching night. Ethan pulled into a shadowed alley across the street, killing his engine with a soft sigh. The place was a relic. Peeling paint, flickering vacancy light, the parking lot dotted with rusted pickups and the occasional Harley of transients passing through. He watched from afar as Jax and Samuel entered the lobby, their broad frames filling the doorway, casual as patrons seeking a room. Inside, the clerk, a wiry man with nervous eyes, fumbled keys while they chatted idly, probing for cracks in the facade. Ethan's radio crackled to life moments later. Got a lead. Room 12. Vance is regular. Lady in there looks scared, won't say much. Heart pounding with the steady rhythm of purpose, Ethan dismounted, his boots silent on the gravel. He approached the motel's side, peering through a grimy window where curtains fluttered like trapped breaths. A woman in her 30s, hollow-cheeked and tense, paced the room, glancing at the door every few seconds. Signs of strain etched her features, trembling hands, averted gaze, as if she'd been cornered by invisible chains. Ethan knocked softly, 3 raps that echoed his intent. The door cracked open, her eyes widening in wary surprise. "Iron promise," he said simply, flashing the eagle patch. "Heard you're carrying a load. We ride for folks like you. What's Vance got on you?" She hesitated, the weight of secrets pressing down, but something in Ethan's steady gaze, the echo of his own buried pain, cracked her resolve. Words tumbled out in whispers, coerced favors, threats to her family, a ledger of debts that grew like weeds in the dark. It painted Vance not as a lone wolf, but the tip of a blade wielded by higher powers, town officials turning blind eyes for cuts of the profit, preying on the vulnerable to line their pockets. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, the injustice burning like hot chrome. This was the corruption he'd sensed, a poison seeping into the soil, demanding a cleansing fire of truth. As the woman slipped him a crumpled note with a contact name, a disgruntled insider ready to talk, Ethan stepped back into the night, the motel's hum fading behind him. He radioed the others. "Threads connecting. Meet at the warehouse edge at midnight." The engines would roar again soon, carrying them deeper into the fray, for every soul caught in the web, for the promises that bound him to this path. Ethan rode on, ghost of regrets turned guardian, the desert wind at his back whispering of battles yet to come. Midnight cloaked the warehouse district in a shroud of inky black, broken only by the sporadic glow of sodium lamps that hummed like weary sentinels. The structures loomed like forgotten giants, their corrugated walls scarred by rust and the relentless kiss of desert winds. Ethan eased his Road King to a stop at the perimeter fence, the engine's rumble fading into a whisper as he cut the ignition. The air was thick with the metallic tang of cooling machinery and the faint acrid bite of distant campfires from the transient lots nearby. Gravel crunched under his boots as he dismounted, senses sharpened by the night's quiet tension, a predator's instinct honed from years of riding the edge between shadow and light. Jax and Samuel were already there, shadows merging with the chain-link barrier, their bikes tucked out of sight behind a stack of weathered pallets. Marcus arrived moments later, his Softail gliding in like a ghost ship, the low growl announcing his presence before the headlights swept the ground. They gathered in a tight circle, faces illuminated by the soft blue glow of a tactical flashlight Ethan pulled from his vest. No words of bravado passed between them. This was the iron promise way, actions spoke in the hush before the storm, oaths sealed in the shared weight of what was at stake. "The note checks out," Ethan murmured, passing the crumpled paper to Marcus. It bore a single name, Harlan, no relation to him, but a coincidence that twisted like a knife, followed by a time and a back entrance code. The insider, a former driver for Vance's crew, had reached out through the nurses' network, his conscience cracking under the burden of complicity. They moved as one, slipping through the fence with the practiced silence of men who'd navigated worse than urban ruins. The warehouse yard stretched out, littered with abandoned crates and the skeletal frames of loading docks, the wind carrying faint echoes of creaking metal. Ethan's heart thudded steadily, each step a reminder of the promises threading through his life, the one to his lost daughter, whispered in hospital corridors, the vow to his squad, shattered in the haze of war, and now this new thread to Lily, fragile as a desert bloom. He thought of her back at the safe house, tucked in with Carla under the watchful eyes of a rotating guard. The girl's trust had ignited something dormant in him, a fire that burned away the numbness of endless roads. At the rear door, Marcus punched in the code from the note, the lock clicking open with a soft beep that seemed deafening in the stillness. They filed inside, the air shifting to a cooler, mustier embrace laced with the scent of damp concrete and stacked pallets of unmarked boxes. Dim emergency lights cast elongated shadows, turning the vast space into a labyrinth of half-seen threats. Footsteps echoed faintly as they advanced, sticking to the walls, breaths measured and eyes scanning for movement. Jax took point, his bulk a reassuring presence, while Samuel covered the rear, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a utility tool. No weapons of intent, just tools for the truth. The insider waited in a cluttered office at the far end. A nervous figure hunched over a flickering desk lamp. He was in his 40s, gaunt with worry lines etching his face like cracks in parched earth. Nathan, he'd introduced himself in a hurried whisper when they approached. His hands trembled as he slid a ledger across the scarred desktop, pages filled with coded entries that told a damning tale. Shipments masked as aid supplies, debts funneled through shell accounts, and names of locals ensnared in the web, including Carla's. "Vance isn't the head," Nathan confessed, his voice a ragged thread in the dim light. "It's the sheriff himself, pulling strings from City Hall. They target the down and out, promise fixes for addictions that never come. I drove the runs, saw the pressure they put on families. Kids like that girl, their leverage, silent warnings." Ethan's jaw tightened, the words landing like blows to an old wound. He leaned forward, the lamp's glow catching the eagle tattoo on his arm, a symbol of vigilance unbroken. "Why now? What changed?" Nathan's eyes darted to the shadows, as if expecting interruption. "Heard about the bikers stepping in. The bar, the safe house. Figured if anyone could expose it without more harm, it's you. But they're watching. Tonight's a drop, pills incoming. If you document it clean, take it to the right ears outside town." His voice trailed off, the plea hanging heavy, a man's redemption offered on the edge of fear. The group absorbed it, the moral weight settling like dust after a storm. This wasn't a brawl in a back alley. It was a surgical strike against corruption's heart, demanding integrity over impulse. Marcus nodded, snapping photos of the ledger with a concealed camera. The shutters click, a quiet vow of accountability. Jax scouted the loading bay through a cracked door, radioing back, trucks inbound, 2, unmarked, guards, but sloppy. Tension coiled in the air, thick as the warehouse's stale breath. Ethan's mind raced to Lily's wide eyes, Carla's fractured resolve. These weren't abstract victims. They were the reason the Iron Promise rode, a chosen family extending its shield to the overlooked. They positioned themselves strategically, Ethan and Nathan in the office with eyes on the bay, Jax and Samuel melting into the upper catwalks, shadows among the rafters. The trucks rumbled in minutes later, headlights piercing the gloom like accusatory fingers. Men unloaded crates under the cover of night, their movements efficient but edged with paranoia. Whispers of, "Vance said keep it quiet," floating up like smoke. Ethan captured it all on video, the footage a weapon of light against the dark. No confrontations, no chaos. Just evidence, cold and irrefutable, building the case for justice that courts couldn't ignore. As the trucks departed, tires crunching away into the night, The group reconvened, adrenaline humming in their veins. Nathan clasped Ethan's hand, a silent pact forged. "Get this out, for all of us." They slipped back into the desert's embrace, engines firing up in staggered sequence to avoid drawing eyes. The wind whipped at Ethan's face as he led the ride back, the ledger secure in his saddlebag, the weight of truth heavier than any chain. Dawn was hours away, but the first light of change flickered on the horizon, a promise kept, binding scars into strength. Yet deeper in the web, Vance stirred, his shadows lengthening, unaware that the rider's quiet honor was closing in. If this chapter's tale of silent courage and unbreakable bonds is stirring something in you, drop a like below. It helps these stories reach more hearts in need of hope. The first blush of pre-dawn light crept over the Badlands, like a hesitant promise, turning the jagged horizon into a silhouette of muted golds and purples. Ethan throttled back on his Road King, the engine's rumble softening to a purr as the convoy eased into the safe-house yard, dust settling in lazy spirals behind them. The air carried the crisp bite of night, giving way to morning, mingled with the faint, oily residue of the warehouse run, clinging to their leathers. His saddlebag felt heavier now, not just with the ledger and footage, but with the gravity of what they'd uncovered. A tangled root of deceit that reached far beyond Vance's enforcer grip into the town's very core. Ethan's jaw ached from clenching it on the ride back, the wind's whip against his face doing little to cool the slow burn of righteous anger. He killed the ignition, the sudden silence amplifying the distant call of a coyote fading into the scrub. Jax dismounted first, his boots hitting the gravel with a thud that echoed his bulk, while Samuel and Marcus followed, their faces etched with the quiet intensity of men who'd stared down worse shadows. The safe house loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly from the lantern Carla had lit inside, a beacon in the dim. Ethan slung the bag over his shoulder, the zipper's rasp cutting the hush. "We got enough to start unraveling it," he said low, his voice gravel-worn from the road. "But dawn's coming. We lay low till we can get this to someone clean, outside the county line." Inside, the cabin wrapped around them like an old friend's embrace, the scent of herbal tea steeping on the stove, chasing away the night's chill. Lily was awake, perched on the edge of the couch in oversized pajamas borrowed from a club stash, her stuffed rabbit propped beside her like a sentinel. Carla hovered nearby, pouring mugs with hands steadier than before, the club's quiet support weaving a fragile calm into her frayed edges. The girl's eyes lit up as Ethan entered, a small smile breaking through the worry lines that shouldn't belong on a child's face. "You came back," she whispered, sliding off the couch to wrap her arms around his leg, the warmth of her trust piercing deeper than any blade. Ethan knelt, ruffling her tangled hair, the gesture grounding him amid the storm brewing in his chest. "Told you I would, kid. Like the dawn." He glanced up at Carla, who met his gaze with a nod laced with gratitude and lingering shame. The room filled as the brothers filed in, the space shrinking under their presence, but expanding with the unspoken bond that defined the iron promise. Marcus set the camera on the table, its lens still warm, while Jax brewed more coffee, the pot's gurgle a rhythmic counterpoint to their debrief. No one rushed. This was the pause before the push, where plans hardened like cooling steel. Samuel spread the ledger pages under the lantern's glow, the ink stark against yellowed paper, names, dates, routes that mapped a web of coercion snaking through the town. "Sheriff's name's right there, buried in the cuts," he rumbled, his finger tracing a line that tied Vance's drops to official blind eyes. "They've been squeezing folks like Carla for years, using the bar and motel as funnels, promises of help that turned to chains." Carla leaned in, her face paling as she recognized entries, her own debt scrawled in hurried script, leverage that had kept her silent and spiraling. Lily clung to her side, sensing the undercurrent without grasping its depth, her small hands squeezing her mother's for reassurance. Ethan's mind drifted to the warehouse shadows, Nathan's haunted confession replaying like a looped reel, families pressured, lives bent under threats that left invisible marks. It mirrored his own ghosts, the war buddy he'd sworn to pull from the fire, only to find the line severed too soon. The daughter whose waiting silhouette haunted his dreams. This fight wasn't abstract, it was personal, a chance to mend fractures with action, to honor oaths that time had tried to erode. "We don't storm in," he said, his tone steady as the club's creed. "Footage goes to a contact in Reno, old ally from the service, runs a clean investigations firm. No badges involved yet. We build the case airtight, let the truth do the riding." Marcus nodded, pocketing the camera with a click. "I'll handle the drop-off at first light. Jax, you and Bear fortify here, eyes on the roads in and out. Ghost, you stay with them." There was no debate. The iron promise operated on trust. Each man a link in the chain of loyalty that stretched back to dusty battlefields and midnight vows. As the sky outside lightened to a soft rose, the group shared a meal. Simple eggs scrambled on the hot plate, the sizzle filling the air with a domestic normalcy that belied the stakes. Lily ate quietly, her gaze flicking between the men, absorbing their quiet strength like sunlight on parched soil. For the first time in weeks, the cabin felt less like a hideout and more like a hearth, the chosen family weaving safety from threads of resolve. But peace was fleeting in these badlands. As the sun crested fully, bathing the porch in warm light, a low rumble echoed from the distance, not the club's bikes, but something heavier, deliberate. Ethan stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the glare, his hand instinctively dropping to his belt. A black SUV crested the rise, dust billowing in its wake like a warning flag. It pulled up short of the yard, doors opening to reveal two figures in crisp shirts and badges glinting under the morning sun. Deputies, their faces set in official masks that hid sharper intents. The lead one, a stocky man with a mustache like steel wool, approached with measured steps, his partner hanging back by the vehicle. "Mr. Harlan," the deputy called, voice carrying the false calm of authority. "Sheriff's office. Got reports of disturbances, bikes tearing up the roads, folks holed up here. Mind if we take a look around?" Ethan's stance didn't shift, but his eyes hardened, reading the play. A probe, testing the waters before Vance's hounds closed in. Inside, the room tensed, Jax moving to the window with silent grace. Samuel herding Carla and Lily toward the back room. The air thickened, the desert breeze whispering through the sagebrush like a held breath. This was the corruption's first lash, probing for weakness. Ethan met the deputy's gaze, his voice even, laced with the unyielding honor of a man who'd faced down worse. "Just family gathering, officer. Nothing to see but good company." The words hung between them, a line drawn in the dust as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that hinted at the confrontations yet to unfold. The iron promise wouldn't break. Promises like theirs were forged to bend the world, not yield to it. The sun beat down on the safe-house yard like a relentless interrogator, turning the gravel into a shimmering mosaic of heat and shadow. Ethan stood firm on the porch, his broad frame blocking the doorway, the eagle patch on his vest catching the light like a badge of defiance. The deputies advanced slowly, their polished boots kicking up faint puffs of dust that swirled in the dry air, carrying the faint scent of starched uniforms and underlying tension. The lead one, Deputy Harlan, no kin but the name a mocking echo, stopped a few paces away, his mustache twitching as he sized Ethan up. His partner lingered by the SUV, hand resting casually on his belt, eyes scanning the bikes lined up like silent witnesses. "Family gathering, you say?" Deputy Harlan repeated, his voice laced with skepticism, a smirk playing at the edges of his mouth. He adjusted his hat against the glare, the brim casting a sharp line across his face. Sheriff's got complaints. Noise, loitering, maybe some unauthorized activity. We've had eyes on this place. Mind stepping aside so we can verify?" The words were polite, but the undercurrent was clear. A fishing expedition, Vance's tendrils reaching out to rattle the cage before slamming it shut. Ethan felt the weight of the saddlebag inside, the ledger and footage burning like hidden embers, but his expression remained stone, honed by years of facing down bluffs on the road and in the sands of forgotten wars. From the corner of his eye, Ethan caught movement through the screen door, Jax easing toward the back, his massive form a shadow ready to shield. Samuel had Carla and Lily tucked away in the inner room, the girl's soft whisper muffled by the walls, a reminder of why this line couldn't be crossed. The air hummed with the distant buzz of cicadas, amplifying the standoff, every second stretching like taut leather. Ethan's mind flashed to Nathan's confession in the warehouse gloom, the ledger's damning script exposing the sheriff's hand in the coercion that had ensnared so many. This visit wasn't coincidence. It was the system's first counterpunch, testing the iron promise's resolve. "No warrant, no entry," Ethan replied evenly, his gravelly tone carrying the unshakable calm of a man who'd stared into worse voids. He crossed his arms, the leather of his vest creaking softly, a subtle barrier. "We're just folks looking out for our own. If the sheriff's worried, he can come himself." Deputy Harlan's eyes narrowed, the smirk fading into a harder line, his hand drifting toward his radio. The partner shifted, the SUV's engine ticking as it cooled, a mechanical heartbeat underscoring the impasse. Inside, Marcus slipped the camera into a hidden compartment under the floorboards, his movements precise, silent as the club's oaths. The deputy chuckled low, a sound without humor, stepping closer until the scent of his aftershave cut through the desert dryness. "Big talk for a bunch of road dogs. We've got reports of a woman and child here. Possible custody issue. Carla, right? And her kid. Sounds like interference to me." The probe hit close, aimed at the heart of Ethan's promise to Lily, the small hand that had trusted him in the neon haze. He thought of her wide eyes outside the bar, the stuffed rabbit clutched like a lifeline, and the vow that had pulled him from his ghosts. This wasn't just about evidence. It was about protecting the fragile threads of redemption weaving through the chaos. Before Ethan could respond, the screen door creaked open behind him and Carla stepped out, her face pale but set with a newfound steel. Lily peeked from behind her skirt, the rabbit dangling from one hand, her gaze flicking between the strangers with quiet wariness. "They're helping us," Carla said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "No interference, just getting back on our feet." The deputies exchanged a glance, surprise flickering across Harlan's features. The script flipped, the prey speaking up. Ethan placed a subtle hand on Lily's shoulder, a grounding touch that spoke volumes, the warmth of her small frame an anchor against the rising tide. Deputy Harlan's radio crackled then, a distorted voice from dispatch cutting the tension. "Stand down on the safe house call. Repeat, stand down." His jaw tightened, frustration etching deeper lines, as if an unseen hand had pulled the plug. The partner muttered something under his breath, retreating to the SUV with a backward glance. "This ain't over," Harlan warned, pointing a finger like a loaded accusation. "Sheriff'll be hearing about it." He turned on his heel, boots crunching gravel as he followed his partner, the vehicle roaring to life in a spray of dust that hung in the air like a parting threat. As the SUV vanished over the rise, the yard fell into a heavy quiet, broken only by the wind rustling the sagebrush. Ethan exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest loosening fractionally, but the encounter lingered like exhaust fumes, Vance's web tightening, the sheriff's shadow looming larger. Inside, the group reconvened around the table, the lantern's glow casting warm pools on the maps and notes. Marcus confirmed the camera was secure, his scar pulling as he grinned faintly. That was too close. They knew enough to poke, but not the full picture. Jax nodded, pouring fresh coffee, the steam rising like signals of vigilance. "Buys us time. Marcus, you still good for the Reno run at noon?" "Yeah," Marcus replied, folding the maps with care. "I'll take a couple, brothers. Keep it low profile. Get the package to our contact. Let the investigators chew on it." Carla sat with Lily on her lap, the girl tracing the eagle on Ethan's vest with a curious finger, her earlier fear easing into the room's protective hum. "Thank you," Carla whispered, meeting Ethan's eyes, the words carrying the weight of a life teetering towards salvage. "For seeing what I couldn't." Ethan nodded, the ache of his past mingling with this budding hope. The boy from the war, his daughter lost, now echoed in Lily's quiet trust. Promises weren't just words, they were the ride that carried you through the storm. By midday, Marcus and two riders, Jonathan Hawk Ellis, a wiry vet with sharp eyes, and Ryan Forge Patel, who built like a tank with a mechanic's steady hands, geared up for the handoff. Their bikes idled in the yard, engines purring with restrained power, the chrome glinting under the relentless sun. Ethan clasped Marcus's shoulder, the grip firm, a silent exchange of the club's unbreakable code. "Ride safe, truth's our weapon, keep it sharp." The convoy pulled out in formation, dust trails marking their path toward the highway, vanishing into the heat haze like arrows loosed toward justice. Back at the safe house, Ethan walked the perimeter with Samuel, checking the fences and horizons, the sun warming their backs as they scanned for tails. The desert stretched endless, a canvas of resilience, but Ethan knew the calm was deceptive. Vance wouldn't slink away. The pressure on Carla, the signs of coercion that had scarred her world, demanded retaliation. Inside, Lily played softly with her rabbit on the porch, Carla watching with a mother's guarded hope, the air scented with wildflowers pushing through cracks in the earth. Ethan's phone buzzed, an encrypted message from Nathan. "Watched your backs from afar. Drops clean. They're scrambling now." A spark of momentum, but the real test loomed, the moral lines drawn sharper with every mile. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Ethan sat with Lily, sharing stories of open roads and loyal rides, her laughter a rare melody cutting through the weight. The iron promises web of loyalty extended here, in these quiet moments, binding wounds into wisdom. Yet, in the distance, a faint rumble stirred. Not engines, but thunderheads gathering on the horizon, promising a storm that would force every vow to the forefront. Redemption rode on the edge of confrontation, and Ethan was ready, his ghosts finally allies in the fight for the light. The thunderheads rolled in from the west like uninvited guests, their dark underbellies swelling against the fading afternoon sky, promising a downpour that would wash the Badlands clean or drown them in fury. Ethan paced the safe-house porch, the wooden planks creaking under his boots, the air growing heavy with the metallic tang of impending rain. Sagebrush swayed in erratic gusts, whispering warnings through the fence line, while inside, the lantern's glow flickered against the windows like a heartbeat quickening. Hours had ticked by since Marcus's convoy vanished into the heat haze, each minute stretching the tension taut as a bowstring. Ethan's mind churned with fragments of the past, the war's distant echoes, his daughter's final smile blurred by time. But they paled against the immediate stakes, Lily's safety, Carla's fragile recovery, and the ledger's secrets that could shatter the town's rotten core. A low rumble cut through the wind, not thunder but engines, familiar, purposeful. Ethan straightened, shielding his eyes as three bikes crested the rise, dust plumes trailing like victory banners. Marcus led, his scar stark in the gathering gloom, Jonathan and Ryan flanking him in tight formation. They pulled up sharp, tires skidding to a halt in the yard, the engine's growl dying into the hush. Marcus dismounted first, his face etched with grim satisfaction, the saddlebag slung over his shoulder, heavier with more than evidence. "It's done," he said, clasping Ethan's forearm in a grip that sealed brotherhood. "Contact in Reno took the package. Footage, ledger, all of it. They're looping in state investigators now. Clean hands, no local ties. By morning, the sheriff's office will be crawling with badges from outside." The words landed like the first fat raindrops, splattering the gravel with a sizzle. Inside, Jax and Samuel gathered the others, the cabin filling with the scent of damp earth seeping through the cracks. Carla stood by the table, Lily at her side, the girl's rabbit clutched tight as if bracing for the storm. Marcus spread fresh printouts, statements from Nathan, timelines pieced together by the Reno firm, painting the web in stark relief. Vance's enforcer role as the sheriff's shadow, coercion funneled through false aid programs that ensnared the desperate, leaving families fractured under invisible pressures. "They moved fast," Marcus continued, his voice steady amid the rising wind. "Sheriff's already squirming, called off his dogs after our contact leaked a preview to the press wires. Vance bolted at dusk, holed up in that warehouse thinking it's safe." Ethan nodded, the pieces aligning like chrome on a rebuilt frame, but triumph felt hollow without closure. Rain began in earnest now, sheets lashing the roof in a rhythmic roar that drowned the world's edges. Lily edged closer to him, her small hand finding his, trust woven from nights of quiet promises. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice a thread in the downpour. Ethan knelt, rain dripping from the eaves onto his shoulders, meeting her eyes with the weight of every vow he'd kept. "Almost, kid. One last ride to make sure." The iron promise didn't leave loose ends. Their code demanded the full measure of justice, moral and unyielding, against the corruption that preyed on the weak. As night deepened, the storm broke with fury, lightning cracking the sky like shattered glass, illuminating the convoy reforming in the yard. Water sluiced off leathers and helmets, turning the ground to mud that clung like regret. But the riders mounted undeterred. Ethan, Jax, Samuel, Marcus, Jonathan, Ryan, a phalanx of loyalty cutting through the deluge. Carla watched from the porch, Lily bundled in her arms, their silhouettes framed by the cabin's warm light. "Be careful," Carla called, her words nearly lost to the gale, but Ethan caught them, nodding as thunder rolled approval. The engines thundered to life, a defiant symphony against the chaos, tires churning through the slick path toward town. The highway blurred in the rain-smeared headlights, wipers slashing rhythmically, each mile a step toward reckoning. The warehouse loomed through the storm like a drowned beast, its lights blurred halos in the torrent. State investigators had arrived ahead, their unmarked vans huddled at the perimeter, blue lights pulsing silently under the downpour. Ethan pulled up short, killing his engine as agents in rain-slicked jackets waved them through a cordon. Inside the yard, chaos reigned. Vance pinned against a loading dock by two agents, his face twisted in the floodlight's glare, rain streaming down his defiant scowl. The sheriff stood nearby, hands cuffed behind him, his once authoritative stance broken, eyes darting like a cornered animal as evidence crates were hauled into vans. Pills, ledgers, the rotten fruits of their scheme exposed. An agent approached Ethan, water beading on his badge, extending a hand. "Your tip sealed it. No shots fired, just truth. Vance was mid-call to his suppliers when we rolled in. Whole networks unraveling." Ethan's gaze locked on Vance, not with hate, but the cold clarity of justice served, the man's threats to families like Carla's reduced to soaked confessions. The sheriff met his eyes briefly, a flicker of recognition passing. No words, just the silent admission of a system toppled by honor's quiet force. Lightning forked overhead, etching the scene in stark white as agents led the pair away. the storm's rage mirroring the moral storm they'd unleashed. Back at the safe house, the rain eased to a patter as dawn pierced the clouds, painting the Badlands in silvered light. The convoy returned soaked but unbroken, steam rising from engines like exhaled relief. Lily rushed out, splashing through puddles to hug Ethan's leg, her laughter mingling with the drip of Eve's. Carla joined them, tears tracing clean paths down her cheeks, the weight of coercion lifting like fog, burned away. "It's really over," she whispered, embracing the group. The bikers, her saviors, now family forged in the fire of shared trials. Ethan watched the horizon clear, the desert awakening with the scent of wet earth and renewal. His ghosts lingered at the edges, the lost daughter, the war's unfinished oaths, but they felt lighter now, redeemed in Lily's bright gaze and the club's unyielding bond. The iron promise had ridden not for glory, but for the fragile promises that bound the broken, proving that in a world of shadows, loyalty and truth could carve the light. As the sun climbed, warming the yard, Ethan slung an arm around Jack's. The brotherhood's quiet strength, a legacy etched in scars and miles. For the chosen family, the road stretched endless, but justice had found its dawn. Thank you for riding along on this journey of promises kept and hearts mended. If these tales of courage and redemption resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more. Your support keeps the stories rolling.